Today, we're diving into a short but absolutely incredible story from the book of 2 Kings, chapter 4. It's a story about a desperate widow, a prophet of God, and a small pot of oil that completely defies logic to bring about a mind-blowing miracle. First things first, let's set the scene. Picture this. We're in the northern kingdom of Israel, sometime in the 9th century BC. It's a time of major spiritual and political chaos. The legendary prophet Elijah has just handed the baton, so to speak, to his successor, Elisha. So now, Elisha is God's main spokesperson in a nation where the government is actually promoting the worship of a false god, Baal. It's in the middle of all this tension that our story begins. So, where does the story kick off? It starts with a widow's desperate cry. And to really feel the weight of her situation, we've got to look closely at the very first verse. As you can see in verse 1, the person crying out for help isn't some queen or a powerful official. She's a widow, and she's part of a community they called the Sons of the Prophets. Now, these were basically groups of God's followers, and they were often poor, just trying to stay faithful in a country that had pretty much turned its back on God. And when she hits rock bottom, who does she go to? Straight to the top. Elisha, the leader of the whole movement. Now, you have to understand just how vulnerable this woman was. Back in the ancient world, being a widow was one of the most dangerous positions you could be in. No husband to provide, no inheritance coming her way, and pretty much zero legal protection. But here's the really crucial part. She makes it crystal clear her husband was a man who feared the Lord. So this isn't a story about someone being punished for sin. It's about a faithful family facing a terrible, brutal hardship. And this hardship is absolutely severe. A creditor is on his way, and he plans to take her 2 sons as payment for the debt. This practice, a kind of debt slavery called bondmen, was, well, it was technically legal, but it was a horrifying last resort. It could literally tear a family apart forever. This is the nightmare she's staring down. So you can just see how this all spiraled out of control. Her husband, a faithful man, dies, and suddenly there's no income. The creditor comes knocking, and the only thing of value she has left in the entire world, her 2 sons, are about to be taken away. She is at the absolute end of her rope. Okay, so this is where everything pivots. Elisha gives an instruction that, let's be honest, sounds completely illogical. It's a moment that's all about having faith before you see any fulfillment. Elisha's response in verse 2 is so telling. He asks 2 questions. First, he validates her. He asks, "What can I do for you?" He sees her need. But then he immediately follows up with, "Tell me, what do you have in the house?" And right here, we see this incredible pattern. God's provision so often starts with what we already have, no matter how small or worthless it seems to us. And her answer is it's stark. It's heartbreaking. She says, "I have nothing except for this one small pot of oil." And the original language suggests we're talking about a tiny flask. Maybe enough for one last meal or to light a lamp for a couple of hours. To her, it's basically nothing. But this is where we find this powerful principle in action. God begins with what's left. That tiny flask of oil, which was actually a symbol of blessing and God's presence, is about to become the seed of a miracle. The very thing she saw as insignificant was what God saw as the starting point for her rescue. Then comes this bizarre instruction in verse 3. Elijah tells her to go out to all of her neighbors and borrow empty jars. And he's specific. Borrow not a few. He means get a lot of them. Think about this. She has to act in complete faith, preparing for a supply that she has absolutely no reason to believe is coming. This single act of obedience is just packed with meaning. It requires faith before she sees a single drop of proof. It also seems to connect the size of her blessing to the size of her obedience. The more jars she's willing to gather, the more she's going to receive. It also means she gets to be an active participant in her own miracle. And, in a way, it involves her whole community, even if they have no idea what's really going on. And now we get to the climax, the moment where provision meets preparation. This isn't some big, public spectacle. It's a quiet miracle, happening behind closed doors, where her faith and her work meet God's amazing supply. In verse 4, Elisha tells her specifically, "Shut the door behind you and your sons." This is an intimate moment. This is a private display of God's power. And the only witnesses are the very people whose lives are being saved. Her sons aren't just watching. They are a part of their own redemption. So what does she do? Verse 5 tells us she doesn't hesitate for a second. She goes home, shuts the door, and she just starts pouring. I mean, can you imagine that scene? Her sons are scrambling to bring her one empty jar after another, and she just keeps pouring and pouring from that one tiny flask. Her faith is not passive, it's all action. Verse 6 gives us the incredible payoff. She fills every single jar they gathered, every last one. And when she asks her son for another one, he has to tell her there isn't another one. And it's only then, at that exact moment, that the oil finally stopped flowing. And this illustrates the core message of the story so beautifully. The provision didn't run out because God's supply ran out. No way. It stopped because her capacity to receive it, the number of empty jars, ran out. The miracle was contained only by her preparation, not by God's power. But the story doesn't just end with a house full of oil. The miracle was never just about survival. It was about moving from barely surviving to truly living. Let's look at this complete restoration. Elisha's final instructions in verse 7 are just so practical and life-changing. He tells her, "Go sell the oil, pay off your debt, and then you and your children live on the rest." This isn't just a temporary fix. It's a sustainable plan that completely restores her family's financial security and their dignity. I mean, this just sums it all up perfectly. Before, she was in debt, she was desperate, she was about to lose her sons, and after, the debt is paid, her family is whole again, and she has the resources to live. It just shows that this kind of mercy doesn't just rescue you from a crisis, it completely rebuilds your life. And that leaves us with this final, really powerful thought to chew on. The miracle was limited only by the capacity that was prepared for it. It's a profound idea that challenges us to think about our own readiness, our own preparation. The oil stopped flowing not because the source ran dry, but because there was simply nowhere left to pour it.